Lemmy is Lemmy. He is an intelligent, scruffy, scuzzbaggish, artistic genius.
You know, when I started Motorhead, I thought, well, nobody's going to want to hear this, but I want to do it anyway, you know. And now 16 years later, I'm still doing it. The same horrible fucking band, you know. And people are still queuing up to see it, so it's all right.
Motorhead were the loudest band in rock and roll. You know, to some of us, they still are.
Lemmy came in with his catchphrase about, is it loud enough for you? The obvious answer was always, no. Right, turn it up.
I mean, it was just hard rock or heavy rock, which is how I would describe it anyway.
There's no question about it. Motorhead were unique.
You know, Motorhead were the original sort of tooth-rattling, bone-shaking rock band.
Nobody else sings the way that Lemmy does.
You either love Lemmy or hate him, and I think we all line up on one side of the line or another.
You're hearing basic, brutal, raw rock and roll, loud, in your face, the way it's meant to be.
They were a gang that were coming to kick our goddamn asses.
Going back to the roots, back to almost Neanderthal roots, you could say. Sort of hairy monsters hammering away as loud and as fast as possible with songs that were fairly incomprehensible unless you analyse the lyrics on the sleeve, if you're lucky to read the sleeve.
Motorhead's very first track was the song Motorhead, which of course was the Hawkwind number. And when Lemmy was booted out of Hawkwind by Dave Brock and company, he decided, I'm going to put together a band called Bastard.
And they decided, possibly on the grounds they might not get too much airplay under that title, to change the name to Motorhead.
Which is a great irony if you think about it, because Motorhead is a speed freak. Drugs immediately come into it.
Let's face it, Lemmy likes speed, so much so I think there's the old apocryphal rock and roll story that his doctor told him that if he stopped taking it, he'd die because his system wouldn't been able to take the shock. Motorhead's version of Motorhead was a little more frenetic than the Hawkwind version, which, given the rather laid-back nature of Hawkwind, it was kind of a bit more of a sort of a plodder. Whereas when Motorhead finally laid it down, it was a bit more white noise.
Now, it's not that different from the way Hawkwind did it. Slightly less psychedelic, slightly heavier and slightly dirtier, but not that far removed. Lemmy brought a lot to Hawkwind in terms of the earthy bass and a slightly more aggressive style. And when Lemmy was kicked out of Hawkwind because of drug problems in America, inevitably what Lemmy took into starting Motorhead had elements of what he'd learnt with Hawkwind. Not a huge amount, but Hawkwind weren't just a psychedelic band. They had a lot of rock and roll about them as well.
Actually, Hawkwind was very similar to Motorhead. If you listen, inside Hawkwind there's a three-piece rock band. Right, you get all this talili and toot-toot on the top, but inside is a rock band, three-piece rock and roll band, you know. I just wanted to play like, I wanted to be the MC5, really. That's what I wanted to be. I want to have a singer and two guitarists, you know, in the beginning. And then, of course, you know, the singer gave it up, you know, and one of the guitarists couldn't get along with the other one, you know. It's my solo, no, it's mine. You know, guitar players, all bloody same. So I ended up, I had to do the singing, you know. Jesus. So we just wound up as a three-piece. Everything in your life really is accidents, you know what I mean? The whole thing.
I think Lemmy probably bought the anarchy that he bought. I mean, anarchy probably existed in Hawkwind, given they were such a free-form sort of outfit. You know, they're sort of free-thinking, sort of new ideas, you know, that kind of whole anarchic way of expressing yourself. These kind of hippie collectives sort of had, like Hawkwind and Gong. You know, it was like, well, let's do something new. And I think Lemmy took that to the extreme, so much so, I think, that obviously that's why Hawkwind chose to sack him.
It's one of these things where you start to hear the sound develop. It's the natural progression on from Hawkwind, and it doesn't quite sound the same as the Motorhead that we know and love today. I mean, certainly comparing it to something like Ace of Spades, it doesn't sound like that, but you can already start to hear that sound kind of developing.
Really, it sort of encapsulated their approach, which shocked a lot of people at the time. I remember I was at Melody Maker and people regarded any kind of hard rock or heavy metal as a kind of non-music. The idea of sort of 3-minute blasting, shouting, aggressive kind of rock and roll, which, I mean, it's a sort of bastardised version of rock and roll, I suppose you could say.
As to whether it's actually a perfect introduction to the band, it's kind of a yes and a no. Yes, it is, because you're starting to get the sound, but no, it isn't, because it isn't quite there yet.
It's not a bad little introduction to the band. I would have said that Ace of Spades probably became the theme song later on when that was recorded, but as an initial statement of intent, Motorhead is right on the money.
It's balls to the wall, you know, chant chorus, no messing around, that voice of Lemmy's, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, attack. That's basically it. And it works. It's brilliant.
The album Motorhead was an interesting little number. It was a little bit like a get out of jail card in Monopoly, because they'd recorded an album for United Artists which was eventually called On Parole, because that was the label that Lemmy was contracted to via Hawkwind. They were trying hard to get out of that contract, and Ted Carroll, who was the label owner of Chiswick Records, decided he'd offer them a singles deal. He said, if you can come down to the studio in Kent on such and such a day, we'll give you 2 free days in the studio and you can record us a single. So Lemmy went down with his pals, speeding away, decided to stay up all night and all day, and at the end of the 2 days, Ted came down and he finally recorded an album. So really, Motorhead the album was the single that never was.
Motorhead isn't a great success, but it's new, it's fresh, and it's exciting.
The Motorhead album was something that was a bit falling apart, a bit loose. It actually lived up to their reputation in a way, because Lemmy once said, if we move in next door, your grass is going to die, or your lawn will die. And of course, that's the way you actually hear them on the Motorhead album. So it did them a little bit of a favour. Had they been a little too tight, a little too professional, I don't think they'd have picked up the audience that they did, which is a combination of fed-up hippies and fed-up Hawkwind fans and punks, because punks picked up on the energy and the vibe and the dirtiness and the aggression.
And punk may have stolen all the headlines because that was like Image, and Motorhead looked like a bunch of greasers, so they weren't anything new. But Motorhead were creating at the time the most sort of frightening and shocking new noise that there was to be heard.
With Motorhead, it was a kind of minimalistic thing. There was no attempt to appear like glam rockers. Remember, in the 70s, we'd been through the whole glam rock and progressive thing.
Musicians around that time were all sort of like fairly up their own arses and probably thought, Motorhead, bunch of wankers, you know, they can't play, you know, they just make a noise. but they could play, and they made a bloody good noise.
The first album wasn't massively well received. It was sort of tucked away. It was on quite a small label, but there were people around, obviously people that had been listening to Lemmy from Hawkwind who were pricking up their ears, and it was starting to make small noises around the metal scene. But really it wasn't until the later albums came out, like Overkill and Bomber, that they really started to make these bigger waves in the music scene.
Overkill isn't as good as it gets for Motorhead, but my God, it was a step in the right direction. I mean, just listen to the speed of Phil Taylor's drumming on Overkill itself. You know, I mean, that's frightening. I don't believe that any metal drummer came up with anything quite as bombastic until Dave Lombardo and Slayer. But before that, and we're talking a long way before that, listen to Filthy Taylor's drums on Overkill. That's fast stuff.
Overkill! Overkill! Overkill!
We used to do regular television shows. We used to hire you at television studio, and we used to do regular bronze get-togethers, so we would take 4 or 5 artists and effectively do a Top of the Pops. Very, very economical way of making video. And Keith McMillan had this idea of doing Motorhead, and I said, well, there's no way we're going to record Motorhead live. He said, well, fine, we'll make up a tape and they can mime to it. And we actually got them to do it. And what was interesting was halfway through, and it's 20 minutes long, so you can only run it so many times, and halfway through, Phil said, I can't do this. I cannot play 20 minutes non-stop to a tape. And I said, I don't care what you do, even if you drop dead, just keep going, because all the cameras will pick up whatever else is going. And we made a really good video.
The title track itself is absolutely monstrous. It's a tremendous tour de force of rock and roll. And I use the term rock and roll as opposed to metal or hard rock because that's the way Lemmy has always defined his band. He's always said, we're not metal, we're not punk, we're not hard rock, we're rock and roll. And that's exactly what you hear on the Overkill album.
Phil got double bass drums, which gave the band huge amounts of power rhythmically. So now they had this, driving them along. With Lemmy, who tends to play bass more like a guitar anyway, they've got this heavy rhythmic thing, which gives Eddie lots of room to do what he wants to do.
I don't think they peaked already with Overkill. Again, it was moving further away from the Hawkwind sound, which is this kind of spacey prog rock kind of psychedelic sound, and moving towards hard rock. I wouldn't say it's quite heavy metal yet, but it's certainly starting to get that way.
On your feet you feel the beat and go straight to your spine. Shake your head, you must be dead if it don't make you play. Don't sweat it, get it back to you.
I think Motorhead fans and Lemmy himself would concede that the 3 albums that led up to No Sleep Till Hammersmith were really the creative peak of the first Motorhead. Overkill was obviously the start of that. It was the first album they recorded with Jimmy Miller, who was very well known for his work with the Rolling Stones. Obviously it was a big thrill for Lemmy to work with such an esteemed and legendary producer, and I think Jimmy Miller really pulled himself up by his bootstraps, came up with some really good sounds, and I think it was what he gave Motorhead in terms of sound that Lemmy was able to use later on in the band's career.
Jimmy Miller took them, with his Stones experience, into a whole new area. Although that's what we know as Motorhead, and they probably always sounded like that, but it was if you like, it was a cleaner, dirty band than they had been before. They recorded in our studio downstairs, so I was in and out of the studio while they were recording with Jimmy Miller. And Lemmy came up to him and said, "This guy's absolutely fantastic." They were completely knocked out with Jimmy Miller.
Overkill! Overkill! Overkill!
Bomber was not really the album that Overkill was if we look at it coldly and dispassionately. It had some great tracks, Bomber itself, Stone Dead Forever, All the Aces. They're classic tracks. The highs were high but the lows were lower, not as consistent as its predecessor.
Ain't no hope in hell, nothing gonna bring us down. The way we fly, 5 miles off the ground. Because we shoot to kill, and you know we always will. It's a bomber, it's a bomber.
In terms of musicality, if anything, Bomber was a slightly disappointing album as compared to Overkill. Not that it was a bad record by any stretch of the imagination, it was very strong. However, Overkill was so good, it overshadowed Bomber to some extent.
I don't think that with Bomber they were quite there at the Motorhead formula. I mean, in terms of comparing it to Overkill, the production on it was so much better. You're already starting to get a lot more melodies in there. You're already starting to gather some of that speed.
The Bomber album started to show Lemmy's lyrical content. And, you know, if you listen, if you can hear what you're singing a lot of the time, which is sometimes difficult, but if you listen carefully, he's not singing rubbish. And, you know, he's a man of words. He's obviously well read. And when you see him interviewed, he's eloquent. So what he's talking about is, if not social comment, it's what he sees going on around him.
People tell me you think you know better. Give me service like the things I do. A couple of them even wrote letters. You know I even answered the few I said. I've been doing poison, poison. I guess I poisoned my life. My poison, poison. It's better than marrying my wife, though.
This was a band who, I mean, obviously bursting at the seams with creativity, songs, excitement, youthful vigour, you know, breaking noise records at gigs, you know, and being the loudest, the fastest, the dirtiest, the nastiest rock and roll band there was.
What an album. I designed the tour programme for this tour, actually. And not only is it a fine album, let's see what you got on here. Dead Men Tell No Tales, classic. Lawman, it's okay. Sweet Revenge, Sharpshooter, Poison, all of them good Motorhead songs. Not ones that they played on stage that much, it must be said.
What was different with Bomber as compared to Overkill was the stage set. They brought in The Bomber for the title track, which people immediately picked up on and think, wow, what a great trick. This is fantastic. A bit of stage presence, amazing.
And I think it hit Lemmy on the head a number of times. Hopefully he was a little too out of it to notice. That was a real signature trademark, a visual element that Motorhead had that nobody else had.
Yeah, I can remember going into the offices and Doug Smith, their manager, going, "You're not going to believe this, Crush, we're going to have a bomber, an actual bomber as the lighting rig, and it's going to move." And I'm like, what? Fly out over there? No, don't be stupid. It's going to dip like it's flying, you know. That's brilliant, absolutely brilliant idea. And then when, of course, I saw it, it was like, oh.
And so Bomber, I think, will be remembered as much for the trappings, the sleeve and the big metal aeroplane as the music.
Because, you know we do it right. I make sure every night. It's a bomber, it's a bomber, it's a bomber.
Despite the fact that musically, Overkill is probably slightly the better album, Bomber was slightly the more commercially successful record. Again, simply because of the momentum of the time and the market forces and so forth. But there's no question, Bomber is still a very good album. However, I don't think personally it's good as what came before, Overkill, or what was to come afterwards, Ace of Spades.
Ace of Spades is it.
Commercially, Ace of Spades was the one.
Ace of Spades was their finest moment.
The pleasure is to play. Ain't no difference what you say. I don't say green. The only card I need is the Ace of Spades. The Ace of Spades.
It took them over the top and finally made them into a band that everybody knew.
That was certainly the point where they went, right, this is it boys, we've got it, we're just going to work this.
What was it all about? I've no idea. That very powerful piece that got under the skin.
I mean, whenever I think of Motorhead, I think of Ace of Spades.
Snake eyes watching you. Double up or quit. Double take a split. The Ace of Spades. The Ace of Spades.
Everybody associates Motorhead with the Ace of Spades. I mean, that was their big chart-busting song, the one that they performed live on Top of the Pops and at endless concerts, and it's the one that everybody remembers because of its incredible driving riff and just the hook line, just the phrase itself.
The Ace of Spades. The Ace of Spades.
Almost like a Buddhist chant in a strange kind of way, a motorcyclist Buddhist chant. The Ace of Spades. Well, I won't try and sing it.
The Ace of Spades. The Ace of Spades.
I absolutely love Eddie's playing on Ace of Spades. I think he's a great guitarist, and his licks in Ace of Spades that's what Motorhead is about to me. And there's a wonderful combination of the way Lemmy sings Ace of Spades and Eddie puts those licks in. It's the epitome. To me, that's their best track.
Ace of Spades was one of those records that some bands have, and they have a moment, and that's their moment.
It's another timeless classic rock song which could be played in 200 years' time, and people will still be rocking to it. And if they're not, then the world has obviously ended.
You know I'm going to lose. The gambling's for fools, but that's the way I like it, baby. I don't want to live forever.
They became the rock band that the mainstream liked. Everybody loved Motorhead, they were in the charts, and everyone said, great, what a fine bunch of British eccentrics. And the way they were eccentric, they were seen as characters. They were as threatening as the Carry On movie characters.
I don't know why the general public seemed to suddenly take Lemmy to their heart. So one of those extraordinary British things where somebody who appears to be completely charmless in a way charms everybody.
They didn't seem threatening, even though they looked threatening. And let's face it, you look at the cover of Ace of Spades, these three guys with ponchos looking like they stepped out of spaghetti western, except it looks like a sandpit in your local school in New Malden, rather than out there in the desert. Somehow all that came together and made Motorhead a band that the mainstream felt weren't really threatening.
They had a thing, Motorhead, that they only ever had producers for 2 albums. I think they wore them out. And dear old Jimmy Miller bowed out. Vic Mail came in. He'd been working with bands like Dr. Feelgood, who were sort of the predecessors of punk. And he knew how to get a good sound down. It was a little bit cleaner, less in your face perhaps, but still with the guts. And he took them away to his studio in Rickmansworth. He got a very good album out of them, and I think certainly as far as Lemmy's songwriting goes, it's never been better than that.
It's one of the definitive heavy metal albums of all time. There isn't a bad song on there. Here is a band who at the time were creating the most abrasive and extreme rock and roll stroke heavy metal that there was. Okay, and yet they never lost sight of a good song. Every song on that record is a bloody good, catchy song.
That for me is the pure sound of Motorhead. It's this beautiful mixture of punk, hard rock, rock and roll, and just downright dirty metal.
Many people have asked, how does the Motorhead sound come together?
Don't you think?
Lemmy, for starters.
If someone said, well, what is a Motorhead? Well, it's Lemmy.
Are you still there? What? Fuck me, speak up, will you?
Lemmy's Motorhead, and Motorhead is Lemmy. He's said it himself many occasions, and he's absolutely right.
Yes, without Lemmy there could be no Motorhead, and it's probably true that without Motorhead Lemmy might not be around either.
Lemmy defines Motorhead, always has done, always will do.
Ready? Say yes! Fuck you!
Lemmy is probably one of the ones that keeps the whole rock and roll industry and everything that accompanies with it, the sex, the drugs and the rock and roll. He keeps it in business.
I am not your average, 2.5 children family man, I don't want to know about it. I like chasing women, that's what I like.
Lemmy has always had the focus, the vision, the forward thinking. He's always been the leader of the band. Even back in the early days, he put the band together. It was his idea. He knew what he wanted.
Shut up! You talk too loud! You don't fit in with the crowd! I can't believe you exist! I crossed your eye on my wrist! Too much, too soon! You lay out of tune! No plans!
Motorhead are effectively musically comprised of rock and roll and blues. That's what they've always been about. They're a dirty rock and roll band and an aggressive blues band. They're not strictly speaking a metal band, or they've always been put into that bracket, and everyone talks about Motorhead, the heavy metal band, because I think it's the public perception. If you're loud and you look the way Motorhead do, ergo, you're a metal band. Not true.
I think the Motorhead sound would be called heavy metal in other hands, but because of whose hands it's in, it's a little bit more than that. There's a certain punkiness thrown in. They were certainly on the cusp of the heavy metal and punk movements, and I think that's probably a deal of their success, that both sides, both lots of fans bought into the Motorhead dream.
The Motorhead sound, it's pretty brutal, isn't it? It's a wall of sound coming at you.
Crushing, raw, speed, thrash, loud. That's about it, really. What more do you want, I think that makes up, with Lemmy on top.
Lemmy's, the linchpin of what Motorhead are all about, and everything I think comes from him. It's the brutality, it's the anger, it's the honesty, heart always worn on his sleeve, the kind of earnest desire to continue to make music as Motorhead.
Ultimately, Lemmy makes albums he likes to hear, and those are what go out to the public. And I think Lemmy's attitude is always the same. Personally, I like this record. If you don't, fine, don't buy it. If you do, please buy it. And I think Lemmy's always been a little bit ticked off, shall we say, over the years, that he's made what he considers to be excellent records, and they don't really sell very well, but the back catalogue sells. And that irks him, because I think he feels he's still making valid music. And if you're making valid music, you don't really want your past to be selling and your present to be ignored.
Angel City, Angel City, Louis abused is a shame and a pity. Angel City, you're on the road already. Angel City, Louis abused and no pity. Angel City, shady baby.
The musicality with Lemmy is often overlooked. People talk about the personality of Lemmy. People talk about his TV appearances and the Kit Kat ad, for instance, and his film appearances. People talk about the warts and the moustache and so forth. People rarely talk about Lemmy the musician. I don't believe you can have as long a career as Lemmy, with as much success and respect as Lemmy, without having a lot of musical talent. And most of what Motorhead do is down to what Lemmy feels, Lemmy's ideas. Lemmy's a very credible bassist. Certainly not a bad performer. He's not a bad musician whatsoever.
There's a level of intensity required to play live the sort of music that Motorhead play. If Lemmy wasn't a good bass player, he wouldn't be able to do that.
I think if you're in a three-piece band, you have to do more than just plonk the root notes, and nobody would ever say that Lemmy only plonks. He attacks it, doesn't he? And I think he uses a Rickenbacker bass, which is got a lot more highs than, say, something like a Precision. So in a way, the guitarist has to lay down the foundation, and Lemmy sort of speeds along over the top. And it's a reversal of roles to some bands. It's almost like a lead bass, but nobody can say it's not right for the sound.
I mean, people say Lemmy's a bass player. That's a lie. He's a rhythm guitarist. Yeah. Can't play 6 strings.
Now that's a bit of a controversial topic. Can Lemmy play? Well, Lemmy can play. I wouldn't say that he's the best bassist in the world, but I don't think really Motorhead's music needs the best bassist in the world. Motorhead's music is based around guitars and Lemmy's vocals.
If you watch the way he plays, he doesn't play the bass, as I say, like a... He's playing it like a rhythm guitar, and so he's already, stamped his own mark as a bass player on the rock world, and for that reason it has a unique sound. Superb, unique bass player. I salute you, Lemmy.
He understands his weaknesses, which therefore gives him strength. He tends to play the bass guitar in rhythmical riffs, and he tends to play it with a plectrum, which obviously allows him to sing. You know, he's not like Jack Bruce used to be, who would sing and play complicated bass parts with his fingers at the same time. You know, Lemmy plays it a bit more like a guitar, but I mean, he's a bass player. No, you know, that he knows what a bass player should do. But with a lot of their music, he does tend to sort of lay down the musical rhythm of the piece, which allows him, he keeps it simple, and therefore he's able to sing.
Right now, right here, ain't gonna let you disappear.
Many people ask, can Lemmy really sing?
Lemmy has a unique style vocally.
I mean, I couldn't keep it up for more than about a minute the way he sings.
Well, is he singing or is he growling and shouting?
Well, he's not singing it. He's just like he's just sort of groaning, grunting.
Can he sing? No. Neither can Ozzy. Neither can David Lee Roth. So what?
Well, compared to rap, yes, I think Lemmy is singing.
Love me or leave me. Tell me no lies. Ask me no questions. Send me no spies. You know love's a thief. Steal your heart in the night. Slip through your fingers. Best hold on tight.
As soon as you hear the voice, you know who it is. Unmistakably Lemmy.
They say, don't they, that he has the microphone higher than he needs to, so that by stretching up he can get that certain strained quality in his voice. I mean, I'm amazed he hasn't had nodes and nodes upon nodes and nodes upon nodes upon nodes, but thank God he seems to have managed. Lubricate it with Jack Daniels once a day and you'll get away with it, son.
It's gruff, it's growly, it sounds like he's had several Jack Daniels too many in the morning, but that's the way he is. He's got the sandpaper vocal. And the fact is, nobody else can sing Motorhead because he's made it so much his own.
Well, what Lemmy is doing is using his voice to project his personality. It's like a weapon in a way, like the exhaust pipe of a motorbike. So you're getting this sort of torrent of sound coming out, and in a way that's unique and special, and that's why people sort of appreciate that sort of almost eccentric approach to singing.
You know, you may look at me quizzically, but he is a good singer. He is a man of limited vocal talent who uses his voice incredibly well. And that voice has never let him up on stage.
Lemmy has never, in my opinion, been given credit for his lyrics, which actually are very meaningful and are not just ordinary puerile lyrics, or what most people write any old word to any old note. Lemmy wrote about things that he believed in.
Gambling's for fools, You know I'm born to lose. That's the way I like it, baby. I don't want to live forever. And don't forget the Joker. It almost brings a tear to my glass eye. That's poetry. It's not just lyrics, it's poetry.
If you count his influence by the people who have tried but failed to get the same kind of sound, I think he's proved strangely influential.
All one can say is that without Lemmy's vocal style, the world will be a poorer place.
This is dedicated to a fine body of men. It's called We Are the Road
My God, what, you know, it's just phenomenal listening to that record. Jaw-droppingly brilliant. And yes, it shakes the fillings in the teeth.
Great live albums, I think, have to happen at the right time. We think of things like Thin Lizzy, Live and Dangerous. If that had been a year later, a year earlier, it wouldn't have been the album that it was. Certainly, I think with No Sleep Till Hammersmith, that's exactly the same kind of situation prevailing.
To record a live album when you're in your moment, as Motorhead were with Ace of Spades, then it stands to reason that what you're going to get with the live album, No Sleep Till Hammersmith, hopefully is going to be something of the same level. And this is Motorhead at their peak, the peak of their creativity, you know, the peak of their playing, the peak of their performance, the peak of their success. So they record a live album, and it's one of the greatest live albums of all time.
What made No Sleep work was the fact that it was so exciting. It captured the energy and the imagination, and it captured the aggression, the personality, the character of Motorhead and the audience on those nights.
I think that's the key, really. If you get an album that captures the spirit of the band, not always easy to do. If it does that, then it will work.
Where does it stand in the pantheon of great live albums? Difficult to tell. Right up there though.
When No Sleep Till Hammersmith first came out, it was absolutely regarded as one of the best live rock albums, and I think even to this day it is still regarded as that.
I don't think it's a fantastic live album in the sense it's any better than any other live album, but it obviously represented what the public saw in Motorhead. And it went to #1. We only ever had one #1 album in the whole of Bronze Records' career, and that was it, so it says something.
That must have pissed off so many people in the music industry. One, that they didn't sign them, and two, that a band like Motorhead could have a #1 album. And not only that, a live album.
I don't think any band has ever done a live album that perfectly captures what they're about better than the way Motorhead did with No Sleep.
I think the success of No Sleep Till Hammersmith really proves that Motorhead are a quintessential stage band, and that's what people perceive them as. Certainly these days you'll still get sellout Motorhead tours, but the albums don't make the numbers that perhaps they used to.
It's an attitude. I mean, you know, it's a way of life. You know, when Motorhead in town, you know, even if you're a married man with children, darling, I'm going out tonight.
The great rock bands, the great rock and roll bands, always come alive on stage. That's where they're in their element. Facing a crowd, aggression, energy, backwards and forwards, that's where they really live. And while Motorhead, I'm sure, accepted that they had to go into a studio to record, it was on stage where they really came into their own, where they were louder than anybody else, more aggressive than anybody else, and where the crowd went absolutely mental and crazy. That's really learnt the Motorhead experience, not from listening to their albums. Their albums were an introduction, but if you really wanted to learn the lesson, you went and saw Motorhead live.
You have to go and see them and experience the interaction between them and their audience, and it all makes sense when they're out there sort of pounding away and creating mayhem. They're not a band that are strictly limited to being a live phenomenon. No, I think they can get their music across on record as well, as, for example, the Ace of Spades. You know, it's a great hit single, great record, great track.
Motorhead do pretty well as a studio act, but there are certain things that you just cannot recreate on CD in the studio. You have to do the whole live thing. So I think on CD you get one side of Motorhead, whereas in a live performance you get a different side of Motorhead, probably the side that they would prefer the audience actually saw.
Nothing beats Motorhead at their best on stage. And however good their studio albums have been and will be, it's about live, where they really exist, survive and prosper.
Thank you. See you next time, all right?
I think following up anything as epic as No Sleep Till Hammersmith is just a really difficult task. I think whatever had actually come out after that album, you know, people would have been saying, oh, you haven't quite made up to the standards. So I think in a way it was probably a good thing that maybe Iron Fist came out then.
Who could have sustained that level of intensive creativity that they obviously were on? And it happened very quickly, you know, and very few bands would be able to keep that up.
The problem with Iron Fist isn't necessarily the songs, the problem is the production. They decided, well, let's produce ourselves. Fast Eddie Clarke wants to be a producer, he's worked with one or two bands, well, let him produce it. Didn't work.
But Eddie Clarke was producing that with a guy called Will Reed Dick, who had certain other names added to his nameplate by Lemmy. Didn't go too well. Lemmy wasn't that happy with the results, but when you're on an tour album treadmill, as Motorhead certainly were then, you've got to go with the flow, and so they recorded it. They didn't have a chance to re-record it. It reached a reasonable chart position. It was obviously somewhat on the way down the other side of the mountain from No Sleep.
Yes, it's not creatively as good as Ace of Spades. The title track, I think, is a great song. But by that point, the age-old personnel problems had started to creep in. It was the last album that Fast Eddie was going to record with the band. Anyone who's ever met Lemmy will tell you he's a lovely bloke, but he's a cantankerous old git as well, and he'll probably agree with that himself. You know, not easy people to get on with, a lot of drugs going on. You know, they're never going to deny that. So and that affects everything from, you know, inter-band relationships to the quality of material.
I designed this tour programme. I remember this is when it was all starting to go a little bit crazy.
I think what summed it up is they were going to do a great introduction to their stage set. What they were going to have was a screen that came down in front of the stage showing footage of Motorhead all dressed up, the three of them, in medieval garb, carrying swords and so forth, wandering around, looking menacing. And then the three of them were going to jump through the screen and start the show.
Look at them. I mean, come on. Just look at them. They're wearing their faux medieval metal costumes.
It's a great idea. It never came off and never worked and was never used. Part of the reason was I actually saw the footage that they shot as the intro. It looked like three idiots, completely pissed, just wandering around in a forest. It was completely ridiculous. It just did not work. And I think that's the trouble with Iron Fist. Interesting ideas, but they don't actually work. There's no cohesion to the record.
Where's the bullet belts and the leather jackets gone? I don't want to see bloody Lemmy dressed as Henry VIII, thank you very much. I want my bullets back, bullet belts back, and my leather jackets back. And take your iron fist and shove it up your arse.
Why Eddie left was the single that Lemmy recorded with Wendy O. Williams of Plasmatics, which was a cover version of the country standard Stand By Your Man, Tammy Wynette song. Eddie really wasn't too keen on this at all, and when Wendy had problems getting into tune, Lemmy was prepared to put up with it, but Eddie wasn't. So off the job he went, out of the band he went. Apparently he'd been inclined to leave every few months anyway at that stage, if Lemmy's to be believed. Just this time he wasn't asked back. Motorhead had over 7 or 8 years more or less created their own template. They weren't like any other band, and so to replace any of the members was always going to be difficult. Phil Taylor, the drummer, was a very keen Thin Lizzy fan, and I think it may well have been he who put Brian Robertson's name up in the frame. Obviously Lemmy was very aware of what Robbo had done. They brought him in. He was technically a better player than Fast Eddie Clarke, but as we found, he really wasn't as compatible perhaps as the guy whose place he took and those who followed him.
Brian was too musical for Motorhead because he sort of couldn't help it, you know. He's quite an eloquent rock and roll guitar player, you know. His runs are finished, he picks clean, and you know, sound is good and all that sort of stuff. And he's a mad bastard, but you know, that's what they needed.
When Another Perfect Day came out, I reviewed it for Kerrang! Magazine at the time. I didn't like it. In fact, I remember saying I thought this was possibly another nail in Motorhead's coffin, which Lemmy didn't take kindly to, I have to say. And I can understand why. Subsequently, and years later, I have to say I've really come to love that album. I've come to understand and appreciate why it worked. At the time, I thought this was Lemmy and Filthy being Motorhead and Brian Robertson, ex-Thin Lizzy, coming in and just wailing over the top, and there's no cohesion between the two. I was completely off beat because there's absolute cohesion and continuity between the two. It was a brilliant move. Brian Robertson played some of the best guitar of his career on that record. It has so much fluidity, so much energy. It revitalised the band realistically, and it remains now, strange enough, one of my favourite Motorhead albums. It was a different type of album. They made the move away, became slightly bluesier, brought in a much more fluent, much more technically gifted guitarist, and it worked superbly.
They took the traditional Motorhead sound and added an extra layer texture to it, and I loved it. I loved it all the more for that.
Another Perfect Day just wasn't Motorhead for me. You know, the producer tried to move it in a different direction. Bad mistake. Robbie was not Eddie as far as being a guitarist is concerned. It just wasn't as good.
Whether he was the right guy to join Motorhead, well, I think hindsight proves that no, he wasn't. Another Perfect Day is actually quite a good record, I think, but I think the problem was that obviously when Robbo appeared with Motorhead, he didn't want to be in the band anymore.
Robbo had his fans and Motorhead had their fans, and they weren't necessarily the same thing. There was a little bit of a culture clash, and there was also, I think, rather a clash of drugs, because Robbo was more of a booze man, and of course Motorhead are notoriously chemical based. So there was a real clash of cultures there, which was always going to end in tears, I suppose.
Well, some people were a bit worried about his attitude, really, because he was quite uncompromising in his stage appearance. I remember going to see Motorhead, and that's where I saw Brian making his live debut with the band, as I recall, and everybody was a bit shocked because he turned up wearing a pair of shorts. It was a hot day, but he looked a bit like David Bowie in his Aladdin Sane period.
And he's cut all his hair off, dyed it bright red, appears on stage wearing these silly little satin shorts, totally against the grain of this band that wore black and were the blackest heart of metal, you know, at the time.
It looked like makeup was being used as well, and that really didn't go down too well with the Hells Angels or any of Motorhead's suffering fans.
The fans are like, fuck off. And quite frankly, who can blame them?
You know, being a great guitarist doesn't mean that you can play with Motorhead and do it successfully. I don't think he did it successfully at all. I think it was a bad mistake. I mean, technically, you might be able to put Robbo on one side and Eddie on the other and say Robbo's the better guitarist. I don't know what that means, but if you gave me the choice, I'd go for Eddie every single time. I mean, he's a natural, and Robbo might be able to play twice as fast as him, but it doesn't make him better. Not as far as Motorhead is concerned. So I think that they were impressed by what he'd done, but it wasn't the right ingredient.
Okay, I'm going out now.
Not like that, you're not.
You look like a juvenile delinquent.
The No Remorse album was essentially the first Motorhead Greatest Hits package. It was almost like a closing of a chapter in so many ways. First of all, because of all the lineup changes, it was closing off that particular lineup, but also because it was finalising the record contract they had with Bronze Records. So it was really kind of, let's close this chapter and now let's open up a new chapter and start afresh.
Lemmy was not that happy with it. Now, when you sign a record deal, you don't look in the small print and see whether it says we can have a greatest hits collection at this point or that point or whenever we feel like it. I don't think Lemmy really had a lot of choice in the fact it was going to happen, but what he said was, well, hang on a minute, you're not nailing the lid on my coffin yet. We've got plenty more to come. We may have taken a duff step. It may not have gone well with Robbo, but we can certainly produce more of the goods.
So what they decided to do was introduce the new lineup while also reminding people about their great moments. So they did 4 new tracks: Locomotive, Snaggletooth, Steal Your Face and Killed by Death, which all went on the Greatest Hits record.
It came with a leather sleeve with that great Motorhead emblem on the front.
Look at this, the leather deluxe double vinyl edition with inner sleeves.
Right, leather. A leather sleeve, and it's a great compilation. Lemmy basically had to assemble a new band, and he got in Pete Gill, the old Saxon drummer, who literally only lasted, I think, for the period of the new material they recorded for this record. An ex-army bloke called Wurzel, who's a lovely chap, and Phil Campbell, who'd played in a terrible heavy metal band called Persian Risk. And they recorded these 4 new tracks, only one of which stands up with the rest of Motorhead's quality canon of good songs, and that's Killed by Death.
Killed by Death, that's the one. Because Killed by Death is one of the best songs that Motorhead ever did.
It's a great Motorhead song. And it sounds brilliant. It's very heavy, you know, and musically it's great.
It's funny, had a hilarious video to go along with it, and it was a marvellous record. It's a great song. It still stands up today. And whenever now people say great Motorhead songs, that's going to be in the top 5 or 6.
It was much more a sort of solidification of a band sounding good again than, you know, the kind of debacle that had happened with Brian Robertson being in the band.
I mean, it's a great album, great best of album. You've got everything on here, and 4 great tracks by the new lineup, who's obviously showing very, very strong signs of it going to be another special Motorhead.
You can start to hear a bit of sophistication coming in there, probably because they had more time in the studio. And in some ways, if you listen to that and on the album, then listen to some of the earlier stuff, you know, the recording quality is better on the 4 new tracks. But for me, the original stuff just has that energy and it kicks out a bit more.
The band was kind of, certainly as far as live performances would go, empowered, you know, 2 guitar players. I mean, that gave them a lot more power and more flexibility, I guess.
What that allowed people to do, which they never had in the 3-piece before, was when you were soloing as a guitar player, you'd have some chords happening behind it. So harmonically, different things were happening. And you could create bigger riffs, you could have harmonies. I mean, I don't mean Thin Lizzy dual guitar solos, but harmonies, you know, stuff riffs, fatter riffs, you know.
Lemmy knew what he was doing. He knew they could complement each other. Phil Campbell had the ability to lay back and play rhythm, while Wurzel played lead. Wurzel could do the same, while Phil Campbell played lead. And it had enough of a different style so that Campbell was slightly more metal and Wurzel was slightly more bluesy, that they naturally fitted into certain songs. It fattened the sound up quite considerably. And of course, it opened up an awful lot more potential.
I don't think in terms of music it really made a lot of difference to Motorhead. I think they are and always will be really a 3-piece band, but at the time Lemmy felt that, you know, there was strength in numbers.
2 guitarists, each playing exactly the same notes all the way from top to bottom. And I used to say, well, why have 2 people playing the same note? There was no attempt to expand any sort of talent, and what they played wasn't all that great. You know, you had one guy, Eddie, who played fantastic licks, and they would try to replace him with 2 guys who could play guitar. And in fact, it's a tour de force, because to be able to play exactly the same thing as somebody else non-stop is very difficult to do. Well, they managed to do that. It was very unimpressive.
Orgasmatron was another one of those landmarks in Motorhead's career. It was like, right, let's start this new chapter and let's start as we mean to go on. It was really putting them back on track for where they were meant to be heading.
I think personally, Orgasmatron, which was the first proper album made with the four-piece lineup, is one of the best albums Motorhead ever did.
Orgasmatron is typical, I think, of almost every Motorhead album that's followed Ace of Spades. They've all been good records, and they all have moments of brilliance. And you know, for Orgasmatron, it's the title track that just blows you away. That's a great song.
It's an exciting album and it's a different record. And all you have to do is listen to the title track, which is a slightly more experimental song. And you know that Motorhead were trying different things here. It was as if having the extra guitarist in the band, in fact, having a new lineup, Lemmy being the only one who remained from the previous incarnation, the classic incarnation, had given him a severe kick up the arse.
It's a much heavier record, much harder. It's picking up a lot of the influences that are actually going around the metal scene at that particular time, building them and kind of taking them into this Motorhead style. So you've still got something that sounds extremely Motorhead, but it just builds on it and it just sounds more powerful.
But it also sounds, it's quite dark, and it's not quite so frenetic and thrashy. The guitar playing sounds a bit more like they're trying to sound like synthesizers at times, and that sort of you know, this sort of weird sort of dark synth pop that was going around. I don't know if that was deliberate or if that's just the way that it ended up. It was a slightly new direction, more musically than anything else, you know, and I say that in the sense that Lemmy's vocals and his attitude was exactly the same. So it was really what was going on around him, again, had changed.
It received some of the best reviews of a Motorhead album when it actually came out, and it does remain as one of the big favourite Motorhead albums amongst fans, and the tracks are just used a lot in the live performances.
Stone-faced dog, swirling fog, gates open on the dark, dark night, standing stone, skull and bone, dead witness to an unseen fight.
The material may have been all right in this case, but the sound that Motorhead came out with, Lemmy did not like at all. I think he's described it as a soup-like. The mix was just not sharp and hard-hitting. It was an American sound, and he really didn't feel that was the way he wanted to go. But as ever with the tour album Treadmill, there was no real time for him to put it right.
With Orgasmatron, it's a good record. But so is We Are Motorhead, so was 1916, you know, albums that followed sort of down the line, and all suffered the sort of similar fate. Yeah, well, it's not Ace of Spades, is it? I mean, and Orgasmatron is a perfect example of that. I mean, it's certainly better than Another Perfect Day and Iron Fist. A lot better. But people, by that point, were viewing Motorhead as in a different way. And in a way which they've continued to ever since. And it's just an awful situation that Motorhead have never managed to extricate themselves from.
We're not really in any kind of a niche. You know, I mean, well, we've been put in niches or pigeonholes by the press and that, but I mean, everybody's got to be labelled, haven't they, I suppose. We've always just thought of ourselves as Motorhead music, because we're kind of like diverse, you know. I mean, we play some numbers that could be interpreted as like thrash or whatever, some numbers that could be heavy metal, and still a lot of it is what we would call like hard rock, you know. I mean, when we started, there was no such phrase as heavy metal or thrash or black metal or death metal.
It's quite an honest band, you know. It never tries to be anything flashy or special. It just sticks to one idea.
I think it's perfectly fair to say that Motorhead did repeat the same thing time and time again. I mean, when they found their formula, they worked it to death.
The one-trick pony tag that everyone humps on Motorhead, by and large, is a fair tag. What a great trick, though. All the great rock and rollers have had that trick, and Motorhead have got it. And to be fair, it's a reasonable tag to hang on them. All I would say, it's a one-trick pony, but very few bands have ever done it better than Motorhead.
No, Motorhead aren't a one-trick pony at all. It's too easy to dismiss a band like Motorhead simply for being Motorhead and saying, well, it's all the same sort of thing. They were far better musicians than they were ever given credit for. They wrote far better songs than they were ever given credit for. You only have to look at the level of commercial success that a band who were as extreme as Motorhead were at the time actually managed to achieve in the early 80s when heavy metal became very successful again in the UK. You know, Motorhead were on top of the pops quite a lot. It's Motorhead, for God's sake, you know. At the same time that Rainbow and Status Quo were also on top of the pops. They created music that was friendly to the female ear. Motorhead scared the hell out of the clergy.
Breaking up or breaking through, breaking something's all we can do. Shoot straight, travel far, stone crazy is all we ever are. But I don't care for lies, I won't tell you twice. Because you know those trails, dead men tell no tales. Oh!
That's the good thing about Motorhead, is that they've never veered too far off that sound. People always know what to expect. It is good, old-fashioned, dirty rock and roll.
And it's always difficult, you know, somebody develops a style in rock music for you to say, it's easy for you to say they're a one-trick pony, but that's because, you know, they are the benchmark. You know, you could say the same thing about the Beatles. Because they were the Beatles, you know. No, they're not a one-trick pony because intelligent lyrics, because of the energy, because they had a very focused direction about what they wanted to do.
I think the last Motorhead album featured Lemmy trying his hand at a country and western kind of song. He's also, I mean, 1916 had him singing a ballad. And although these might not have gone down too well with die-hard Motorhead fans, you know, it shows there are more feathers to Lemmy's bow.
Even if it is a repetitive formula, I want that and stuff the ballads. Yes, it is a bit repetitive, so fucking what, it's Motorhead.
The enduring appeal of Motorhead, I think, is their honesty. They didn't try and bullshit you. Never have done, never will. You know, and that's got to be respected at the end of the day.
Because it seems so honest and basic and unpretentious and exciting. All these things combined to give them their long-lasting appeal. People just get it into their heads that they're going to support a band forevermore.
I think people have always considered Lemmy to be ageless. He's almost an elder brother or an uncle to people. I don't think that the passage of time has had any effect, certainly any audible effect on how he plays or sings. So I think the aspect of age for Motorhead is really irrelevant. I think people will come and watch them no matter what their age, because Lars Ulrich of Metallica has said they're cool, because some current band has name-checked them. I think they will always be around, and they'll always be as hip as they ever were, probably because they've never been hip.
Believe it or not, I believe they do touch you on an emotional level. And certainly with their fans, it touched them on an emotional level. I think, you know, they have a predominantly male audience, but not totally. And I think a lot of the young guys associate with what they see up on stage.
They've had their ups and downs, they've gone through troughs, they've gone through real problems financially, business-wise, musically, but they've always come out on top because Lemmy has refused to let it die. And Lemmy, as long as Lemmy keeps fighting the good fight, as it were, Motorhead will carry on fighting.
Maybe we're all getting old, maybe we're all falling off our perches gradually, one by one, but as long as Lemmy can keep going, and I think he'll still be rocking at 60, then there'll still be a Motorhead, they'll still be on stage, and we'll still turn up to see them.
Lemmy is a great musician. He's a great musician, a great rocker, and a great example for children to follow.